Well, hello, everyone. I'm Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Animal Sanctuary. Today is Friday, December 1st, 2023, and I am here with a member of my Patreon community, Natalia. And that also means that I'm here with a client because my Patreon community is specifically an educational platform, and it's where I run all of my animal training and coaching and behavioral consultations through. So she and her corn snake, Janeway, are clients. They're also part of our community. And I'm going to let Natalia introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her and her family to the extent that she feels comfortable. And then we are going to get into the first part of this interview. This is going to be a two-part interview. And the first part is going to be about Natalia's journey, deciding to add a snake family member, picking out what kind of snake species to add to her family, picking out the specific individual snake, and sort of the ups and downs of that journey and how that went. And then in part two, we're going to talk to her about her journey with Janeway, her corn snake, from the day she brought her home up until now, including training that she's done with her, traveling that she's done with her, and emergencies that she's gone through with her. So Natalia, to the extent that you feel comfortable, share a little bit about yourself and your family with us.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me on your channel. I love being part of your Patreon. It's such a wonderful community of just open-minded people wanting to share their reptile journeys. So I love being part of your Patreon. So my name's Natalia Prado. I'm a professor. I teach animal physiology and anatomy. And my family consists of my husband, Manny, and my two kids. And I love sharing my snake with my two kids. They really love her as well. And we live in New York, in Long Island, New York. So when I first got Janeway, we were living in Virginia, which actually ties into why I decided for a corn snake partially. But thankfully, when I first got Janeway, I knew that I would potentially be moving in the near future. So I needed to find a species that had as least restrictions as possible. So like I could have, maybe I could have a retic in Virginia, but I couldn't have one in New York, So when I got Janeway in 2021, we knew I was looking for work. I was looking at, I was finishing my postdoc, and I knew that I was looking for work and we were going to have to move. We were looking in the Northeast area and, looking at different colleges. There's lots of colleges in the Northeast area. And so I knew it was like between Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey. And so I had to look into restrictions and restricted species, and New York is very restrictive. And my husband and I both are originally from New York. We met in New York. So that was like, the goal was to come back home. So I needed to find a species I could keep with me after we moved. So that definitely played into a decision for a corn snake.
Were there any other species that you considered, Natalia, that you knew were legal there, or were you from the get-go really set on a corn snake?
I think I was pretty set on a corn snake. I think I maybe considered a king snake. But so big asterisk caveat is that I love retics. Like retics are my favorite species. And I kind of found you through your retic TC and Reach Out Reptiles. And so, but I knew I couldn't have one. So next on that list, by watching your videos, I saw you had the corn snake normal. And you had two other little corn snakes that you co-housed together for a little bit of time. I think it was like Lincoln and
Yeah,
another.
that was Roberta Lincoln and Gary Seven, which is
Yeah.
from a 1960s Star Trek episode.
Yes. And so, well, and I love that you love Star Trek just as much as I do. So watching your videos on both or those three snakes, I really kind of got enamored with corn snakes, and I saw how personal they can be. Normal is very personable. And then in doing my research, I saw, corn snakes are like native to Virginia. And so in my YouTube like learning journey, I was watching a lot of like your videos. I was watching Liam Sinclair. I was watching Animal at Home's podcast. I was watching, Reach Out Reptiles. And Garrett actually did a video, and someone asked him, I think it was like one of his like live chats that he does, weekly, lives. And someone asked him how you picked the first snake, and he said he suggested a snake native to your area so that as you learn to meet parameters in your enclosures, it wasn't as hard, right? So like if you live in a really dry area and your first snake is tropical, you're going to have a really hard time. Like the learning curve is a little more steep in that scenario. So that really resonated with me. So I started looking at native species to Virginia, and corn snakes again popped up, and I was like, oh, actually, they can be so personable, and they were the right size, like they max out like 5-6 feet. They stay pretty thin. They're beautiful. They have wonderful colors. And that really resonated with me. So I think corn snakes pretty much always was at the top, even though like in my heart I would love a retic, but like it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I understand that. And you have to get what's legal in your area.
Yeah.
Or the area that you know that you want to move to, which is very prescient of you. And you not only made sure that you could have this snake where you were going to relocate to in the future, but I'm sure, knowing you, that you did a lot of research first before you got the snake.
I did a lot of research. I read a lot of papers, scientific articles about corn snakes. You just have to put Pantherophis guttatus or corn snake into Google Scholar, and you'll get hundreds of papers. They're very common lab species, very common wild species that is studied because they're so common in, North America. So they're great ecological, study species. And so I read a really interesting studies about how they move, they climb trees. One study said that they seem to like watch birds and see where they land and go hunt their nests from the ground. And I'm like, wow. So I knew that they were really active snakes. They were diurnal, which really worked for me. I knew that I would like to see my snake, and a nocturnal species was not going to work for me in that case because I, am a diurnal species as well. So I wanted to be able to see my snake, enjoy my snake. So I knew nocturnal species pretty much fell off of my list pretty quickly. And so in reading about them, I just really found them very interesting, found them from the literature to be very intelligent and problem solvers. And I really like that because I knew from being part of your Patreon community and watching your videos, I knew that I wanted to target train. I knew that I wanted to do shift training. I knew that I wanted to do more extensive enrichment with her. And with my science background, I really like that I can do these little like behavior, not really experiments, but like behavior observations with my own animal and keep notes. Like I love Excel files and making charts and stuff. So she was really an animal that I knew I could be fulfilled with at multiple levels, like from an animal keeping standpoint, a carekeeping standpoint, because I want to keep a pet, you want to take care of them. But it also, I knew that I would be interested from a scientific standpoint too. Um,
Now, what made you decide to add a snake to your family? Because I know that at the time you had at least two dogs.
I had two dogs and I had two kids, and one of them was less than a year old at the time. My son was born in March of 2020 or May of 2020. So he's like I had him during the pandemic. Well, so the pandemic actually really helped facilitate getting a snake, oddly enough, because I was on bed rest with my youngest. And so all I could do was like watch YouTube. So I found you, I found Animals at Home, I found, Snake Discovery, I found Liam Sinclair, I found Reach Out Reptiles on my couch, not able to do much, being on bed rest, most of my pregnancy. And I've always loved reptiles, always wanted to reptile, but my mom was really scared of snakes growing up. So snakes were like a no-go. And then unfortunately, like when you're younger, well-meaning family members would buy me reptiles. But like, again, grew up in New York. So like, Chinatown, quarter size turtles in like a little thing that would die immediately. I would spend hundreds of dollars on the setup and then they would die immediately. And then I had a boyfriend at the time purchase me a Russian tortoise who had pneumonia. And I spent thousands of dollars on that tortoise trying to get him well again, but he ultimately died. So I put a call to my very large Hispanic family, like, do not get me any more reptiles. Like, you don't gift people reptiles. They are just a terrible gift for someone who was young, right? I was in college or a teenager, no money, and not prepared for the animal you're showing up with. So I went through a long period of time, I want to say, close to 20 years without a reptile. And then it was during COVID, I'm just like binge watching reptile content. And I think my husband just got sick of me watching reptile videos. And he one day was like, he's like, why are you watching so many? Like, he was just like, you're watching so many reptile videos. And I would watch like Camp Kennan and stuff with my daughter. And all these channels are really family friendly. So I could watch them with my little ones really easily, And he's like, and I was like, well, it's the only way I can experience reptiles. I can't have one. I would love a snake. I can't have one. And he's like, why can't you have one? And I was like, oh, why can't I have one? I'm like, well, my mom never let me have one. And he was like, you're an adult. Like, you pay the mortgage, get a snake. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can get a snake, right? Like, it didn't dawn on me that I could do. And I'm glad I waited as long as I did, because during grad school and postdoc, I also didn't have a lot of money or time. So I'm glad that I did wait. So after that conversation and light bulb moment, I started the process of like getting a snake. And I think in less than a month, I had Janeway.
Okay, so I have to ask you this before we move on. Doesn't your mom live with you?
She did at the time, but I was like, I'm an adult. I can do what I want. And she swore she'd never like walk into the room with Janeway, because I knew I wanted her in our living area, not, put in like a separate room where I couldn't enjoy her throughout the day. So there's like pets that need their own space and then pets that live in your space. So like dogs live in your space. Then there's pets that need their own space. And so Janeway needed her own space, tank set up and whatnot. But I didn't want her secluded away. I kind of wanted to enjoy her. And so she swore she'd never walk into the living room. But she did. She got used to Janeway, and she agreed that she was really cute. But if you ask my mom and she describes Janeway, it sounds like she's describing an anaconda. She's like, she's huge and fat, and I'm just like, it's less than 3 feet corn snake, and I got her at like a year and a half. She was even smaller. She was like a foot or something when I first got her. So yeah, it's all subjective, I guess. But
So, okay. So now you've decided to get a snake and you're taking now actionable steps to make that happen. What did that look like for you?
so that looked like looking at what enclosures I had or what tanks I had. My husband and I were in the aquarium hobby for most of our relationship. We've been together, almost 20 years. And when we first met, we both had aquariums. And so we at one point had like 5 fish tanks, and I had a tank just to raise snails for my loaches. So we had spare tanks. And so I looked to see what I had. Was anything going to be adequate for a baby snake, knowing that I'd have to upgrade her. And then I started looking at where I could purchase a corn snake. And also I want to say, like, watching your videos, I really like your aesthetic of how you keep your tanks. Like, I was aware of like bioactive, and I was aware of like really sterile setups. And I feel like I'm not sterile, and I'm not like make your own background type of person. I really like a mix of like natural and man-made. And I feel like you have a similar aesthetic. So I took a lot of inspiration from how you set up your corn snakes. And you have great corn snake videos of, this is how you set up a baby tank. This is how these are the kind of things like minimum you want for a quarantine tank. And so I like binge watched all of that, and like made shopping lists, like what do I need? And then I started looking for breeders. And I think at this point, this was probably like March 2021. And you had begun your Patreon by then. And I like signed up right away. And the first place I looked was like Morph Market, I think, which is like where most people go to internet shop. And at first I thought, but this was also like 2021. We're not fully out of the pandemic yet. So I wasn't sure if I'd be able to like go see or pick out my snake in person. I'd done enough research to know I should not buy the ones from the pet stores. And I had had really bad experience with previous turtles and tortoises to know that the state you get your animal in is really important. So I was willing to pay money for a good, well-bred animal that I knew with good care at my house would hopefully live 20 years. Like I really want long lived. And that's the other thing I really like about reptiles. They live a really long time. And I had kept, because I couldn't keep reptiles growing up, I kept hamsters and gerbils and rabbits, and loved them all, but they die really quickly. Like my rabbit lived 7 years, which is not a really long time. And that's why I went to dogs, because I'm like, they'll live 15 years. And my dogs did live into their upper teens, but when they go, you're like, I didn't have enough time. So I didn't want a short-lived animal. I wanted an animal that was going to be with me for a long time, hopefully. So I started looking at Morph Market, and I knew I didn't really care about the color. I was really looking for like a normal corn snake or, wild type, because I think they're really pretty. But it was hard to find a normal corn snake. So I just sort of reached out to breeders that had good like reviews on Morph Market. And from knowing, being part of your Patreon and watching all your videos, I knew that there's a wide range of personalities that corn snakes can fall under. And so they can be really shy or really outgoing and bold, like, normal is, your corn snake normal is. And then there's gradations in the middle. So I knew what I wanted was a more curious and confident corn snake, because I have an active household with young kids. And I knew I wanted her in the living room or dining room. I wanted her where we spend time so that I could enjoy her. And I wanted a snake that was going to be active and using all the space I gave her. And so again, that's why corn snakes sort of rose to the top, because they can have really bold personalities and they can be really active. And so you can see them in the great tanks you make for them. And so
now, did you have an age in mind? And I know that we discussed this when you were picking one out. What were you thinking at that time? And did that change as you were looking?
So you and I had talked about like two or less, because I was going to buy from a breeder, and you, from your experience, you had told me like, to get them younger where they've experienced more of an enriched life earlier on, is better for the type of relationship I was looking to have with her. And so they kind of, their brain is more plastic and available to like absorb that enriched environment a little easier the younger they are. So I was looking for a snake younger than 2 years old. But my experience in morph market was not very positive. So because I was not looking for color, I didn't care what, I had a budget. I had $500 budgeted for the snake itself. And then, because I also had to take into account the setup, right? The setup was going to be more than the snake was going to be. And I already had a tank, which helped save some money, but I had to build in, like supplies and upkeep and all that stuff. And so I had a budget, but I didn't really care about the color. And so when I started reaching out to breeders and was not asking about color or lineage, because in corn snakes, lineage can be really important, whether they're like Okatee or Miami or whatever it might be. But I didn't really care about that. I was asking them more about her personality. I said, could you pick me out like what you think would be the most confident and curious snake that you have, knowing that she was going to come, or they, because I didn't know I was going to get a boy or girl at that point, but that they would be in an active household and kind of put into the middle of all the activity. And I got really negative responses from morph market. I got people who never replied, and these were people or breeders who had good reviews on morph market. And so I either got no replies at all, or I got things like, well, just tell me the color, or like, what's the morph? And I'm like, well, no, I don't care about the morph. Like, tell me about the personality. And then they would say things like, well, email me when you're serious. And then I got one breeder who was really negative and said, you're the problem with the hobby. You're what's wrong with the hobby, or something like that. And that was really hard to hear or to read, because I'm not even in the hobby. And I've just spent the last year researching, reading all the papers I can read, learning about their natural environment, learning about their behavior, learning about their training, learning what to do as a new keeper, what are the pitfalls, what to look out for. And here I'm being told I'm the problem. So it was really hard to hear. And I pretty early on, so from that moment, pretty early on, before I even had an animal, I realized the reptile community could be really toxic and really like picking sides. And that was a little off-putting. And I kind of took a step back of like, oh, do I want to do this? But then you rescued me. We spoke in a Patreon meeting. And I told you what happened, and you were like, I have breeders that work with me, and you gave me their contact info. And that, I think, really changed things around for me, talking to breeders who did know how to communicate about the animal's temperament and personality and general characteristics other than morph, and really understanding that these were going to be family pets, and that they were not going to go into breeding programs. They were going to come to a family to be a family member. So you sent me to one of the first, well, you sent me to, so Silent Hill Reptiles and Port City Pet. I emailed Port City Pet first, Joe Phelan, and he was fantastic.
Once you started corresponding with him, I think I also started corresponding with him about you, and he sent you some videos of some particular snakes. And then you shared those with me because you wanted my opinion on their behavior. So talk to me about how that went for you.
So that was like night and day to my experience with Morph Market. He was very, very nice, very understanding that I was a new keeper, looking to do my best, right? So you're kind of like eager beaver, naive. And I can understand how that's annoying, but he was very patient. And he said, I understand. I said, I work with Lori. I'm in her Patreon group. I'm going to want to do training. I want a snake that is not going to be overly stressed by the environment I'm putting her in, or they putting them in. And so he actually emailed right back and said, I have the perfect animal for you. And he showed me, I think he had his phone over his shelves, and he pulled Janeway's tub out, and she immediately came out. And she was like all over him and very curious, not darting, very curious behavior. I still have that video. I could, send it to you if you want to include it in the video. So then I sent you that video, and he sent me another. So she was about 1.5 years when that video was shot, and then he sent me another one that was 1 year old. But he said, I think the first one is a better fit for you because she's a little older and she's a little bigger. Because corn snakes, the one downside to colubrids is that they're really small when they're really little, and like a lot of them, the majority of them get lost from escaping. And that was actually one of the stressors that I had thinking about the snake I was going to get. I knew I didn't want a hatchling because they're like little pencils, and that really freaked me out. But I also didn't want puppies when I got my dogs. I wanted like 3-4-year-olds. Like I don't know what it is. I didn't want baby animals. I kind of wanted an established individual who, would eat for me. I didn't want to have to figure out eating and getting them to eat and all this when I'm a new keeper. So and in discussions with you, we had decided for many reasons, 1 to 2-year-old was the better decision. And so I sent you the videos, and you agreed that the video that had Janeway was the better fit. And so he wouldn't take a deposit on her because I tried to offer him a deposit, and he said, if you don't take her, I'm just going to keep her. So contact me or don't contact me, but kind of thing. So he gave me time to get my setup going. And because I wanted to make sure the temperatures were right and that my tank was maintaining temperatures or whatever. That's very stressful for a new keeper. What are the temperatures and stuff? So from when I sent Joe the first email, I think I had Janeway within 3 weeks. And he sent her to me, and I stayed home that day and waited for her. And I have a video of us unpacking her and putting her into her first tank, which is so cringy, the first tank she went into. But anyway, it was her quarantine tank. And
it's coming out. She's so cute. I have to call her Janeway. She's so pretty.
What really helped too was our conversations with her transition from tub living. She had a 15-quart tub. And so we talked about transitioning her to a bigger space and to living with a family. So that was also really helpful in those early stages.
Now, did he give you information about how she was being kept?
He did. He showed me the video. She's kept on cocoa core, daily changed water in a 14-quart tub with multiple hides and stuff. In the video, he pulled the hides out. And he said, she really needs to move up. So I'm not recommending a 15-quart. She needs something bigger. And I told him that the tank I had, and I told him my setup and what I was doing, and he was like, because in the literature, you hear like 90 degrees hot spot for them. And he said, that's actually kind of too hot. He said, go for 85. And I was like, okay. So then I could adjust. And the vet I had talked to about getting a snake had suggested like this paper pulp substrate or bedding, because you could see the feces really well, I guess she said, for that initial quarantine period. But he didn't like that. He was like, no, I don't like that. So he sent a bag of cocoa fiber of like the bedding she used. So I changed it over pretty soon after she arrived. She arrived into the paper pulp, but then after I saw she was pooping, I changed it out. Yeah. And he made sure she'd eaten not the week she shipped, but the week before. So she'd had a meal within 2 weeks. And he said, let her settle in for 2 weeks and then offer something to her. And he was like, but I'm not really concerned. Like, she's like any corn snake, a garbage disposal. She'll take any food whenever you give it to her. And so he was really like, this is the size food she's on. And I sent him a link of like because I think he had said like fuzzy or something. And so I said, oh, is that this gram weight? And he said, yes. So then I knew what kind of food to order for her. So he was great with communication and making sure that I was comfortable receiving her. So I had food waiting for her. I had bedding. I had everything.
Okay. So before we get into the second part of our conversation, which kind of picks up here where she's arrived at your place, what advice or lessons learned through your own experience would you have for someone else that's looking to add a snake to their family, whether it be a corn snake or another kind of snake? Because I know that you had experiences during your journey that almost made you not get a snake, and then that you've learned lessons that I'm sure if you got a second snake, you would do some things differently. So can you share those things with people?
Yes, I think people interested in getting a snake have to really sit and think about what kind of relationship they expect with that snake. Do they want a snake, do they want an animal that they want to see all the time? An animal that maybe is okay with handling? When I got a snake, I was okay if I wasn't going to handle her all the time. But I knew that at least if I wasn't going to handle her all the time, because that could be stressful for a snake, that I at least wanted to see her, use her space. And I came from like an aquarium background, or having kept fish for many years, where like you just like the aesthetic. You like seeing an animal using the environment you set up for them, and how do they use it, and what are they not using, and what do they seem to like. So I think really think about what you expect, and then do your research to try and match that as close as possible. And because I saw it too in my internet searching, that like, oh, ball pythons are great first pets because their defense mechanism isn't to strike, right? It's to ball up. So they're so docile, but you're not gonna see them very often. So if that's your only snake, are you okay with not seeing them very often? And then you might be disappointed and like, oh, I never see my snake. I have this set up as best as I can get it to the level that I'm at, and I never see my snake. So I think be really realistic about, nocturnal versus diurnal, activity level. And really, I think if people underestimate the value of personality and temperament. And the other piece of advice is that the snake, for the most part, unless you're going for crazy number of morphs, the snake is the cheapest thing that you're going to get. My lights are more than my snake, So that whole like, oh, I can build a setup for $100. No, you can't. It's not going to serve its purpose for very long. So you have to, when you think about getting a reptile, think about the progression you're going to have to do, both in tank setup, but your own education, right? Like, you don't get the snake and, oh, I'm done. and it's just going to live in a tank, and it may or may not want to come out, but you know, kind of, I think some people think like, oh, I'm kind of done. Like they think they're also fish, but they're not. You know, they're very smart and very inquisitive, and there's obviously range of shy to bold. But you as a keeper should know that you are not done learning, and you need to always challenge yourself to learn more, progress, because it's going to keep you engaged with your animal, and it's going to make sure that the welfare of your animal is always maximized to your level. So like I knew about bioactive enclosures when I got Janeway, but I knew I wasn't ready for them. Now she's in a bioactive, but that was a year and a half in when I went bioactive. So I knew that there were steps to this, there were levels. And I even now I know there's still levels I need to achieve. So know that you will need to progress, and you should progress, because it makes the reptile keeping experience more like holistic and fulfilling, I think.
What moral support would you offer people who encounter negativity such as you mentioned? And I am sure that for a first-time snake owner, someone who's looking to add a snake to their family for the first time, to be treated like that must be horrible. And what would you tell people so that they don't take that to heart and they can get through that and move on and actually find someone who cares about where their animal goes and how its life is going to be and will work with that person?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that I had you, but I had also seen how maybe more progressive minded breeders dealt with people, right? I had seen Garrett, and I had interacted with him, and how kind he is, you know, from Reach Out Reptiles. So I knew that there are breeders willing to work with people and talk about personality and temperament. I just don't think that they're very used to it. I would say think about it. Think about purchasing your snake like you would purchasing any other pet, right? I think as we become, no, I adopted both of my dogs, so they weren't breeder dogs, but I knew to ask questions before I adopted them. What's their health history? Where did they come from? Do they like children? Do they like other dogs? Do they like cats? What are their triggers? Now, my dogs had a lot of behavioral issues when I first got them. So like you would ask these questions about any other pet that you would get, right? So they're normal questions. I just don't think a lot of the snake breeders are maybe used to them. So I would suggest, don't think you're strange for asking these questions. You're just asking these questions to the wrong people. So I would say keep looking for a breeder who will work with you, who doesn't think these are strange questions, who will make you feel comfortable and secure about the animal that you're getting. Because Joe also answered a lot of, like, I knew I was getting a healthy snake. I knew I was getting a temperament that I knew I wanted to work with, that would fit my household and like busy life. So I would say keep looking, and reach out to people like yourself, I would say, who work with breeders who are more knowledgeable. I would say look for people who are more knowledgeable. You know, working with breeders to get animals as pets versus, you know, breeders, and have them help you. I would also say you need to be fairly well educated. So reptiles should not be a spur of the moment decision that you do at like a reptile show. Because if you're really well, if you are as knowledgeable as you can be as a first-time reptile buyer, then you can weed out the people who are giving you false information, at least, right? Because since getting Janeway, have also been told that like the tank's too big, she's going to fall and break her back. They don't climb. They don't need UVB. You know what I mean? So like, but having read all the papers I've read, scientific papers I read about corn snakes, I know they absolutely climb. I know they absolutely bask even in the winter. They've been found basking on rocks with snow around them. So then I was like, okay, this isn't the person that I should continue having conversations with. You know, thank you for your time. And then I just move on. So you need to be fairly well researched so that you can weed out, you know, misinformation. And that's
a really great point.
Yeah, and that's the responsibility of the keeper. Like, not just YouTube videos. Like, go research yourself and make up your own mind about what's important for your species. You know, like from reading corn snakes papers, I know that they can eat birds, they eat a variety of vertebrates. So then when I buy food for her, I buy mice, rats, quails, and she's starting to get big enough where I can maybe buy her chicks. But people will tell me that you cannot feed them rats. You cannot feed them chicks. You cannot, you know what I mean? They can only eat a mouse and they can only eat this schedule. And God forbid you feed them twice, you know, 2 food items. So you get a lot of information as a new keeper and a lot of it is conflicting. So you need to have your guide, you know, and you need to make up your mind. And it takes time. So if you don't feel ready to make up your own mind about things, then you're just not ready, you know.
Those are great points. And I also will interject here and say another source of snakes and other reptiles is through rescue.
Yes.
And you don't see a lot of corn snakes in rescues. You do come across them from time to time. And what's great about that, if it's a reputable rescue, is they are going to know everything about that animal. They're going to know its temperament, personality, its behavior, hopefully its history, but not always. But they're going to be able to tell you how it is to handle and a lot about its behavior and personality, because rescues are going to know that stuff about the animals they have up for adoption. And it's also an opportunity to get an older one, like maybe an adult one that's full size that you don't have to worry about losing. So,
or trying to get to feed. Like, I don't know how people with babies are like, it's their 3rd meal and they're not feeding. Like, that would send me into an anxiety tailspin. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to deal with it as a first-time snake owner. You don't have to. Oh, I can't find my baby in my enclosure. You don't have to deal with those things. You can get a bigger animal.
Right.
And I should mention, I did try to go to rescue, a local reptile rescue and like my local reptile groups, but because of COVID, the rescue said that they had no animals and that they weren't taking in animals or doing any of that. So, yeah.
Okay. So I think this is a good place to end part 1. Oh, is that her peeking out?
She's peeking out. Yeah. I was hoping she was moving earlier, but she decided not to.
Okay, so we're going to take a break and we're going to end part 1. And then we're going to have our discussion about what your life with Janeway has looked like to this point. As we conclude this first part, where can people find you and Janeway? Because I know that you share a lot about her and her life.
So we have a small Instagram account. It's Janeway the Corn Snake _ between the words. And I share my training with her. I share my life with her. You know, any traveling I do, like she shifts out on a regular basis. So I show videos of that and our target training. And then, you know, just cute corn snake pictures because they are adorable. They are so cute. And she's got the cutest little face and personality. So I love sharing her on there. Yeah. So you can find us there if you are interested.
Okay, great. And everybody knows where to find me. You can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/behavioreducation, at behavioreducation.org. On YouTube, definitely, just under my name, Lori Tarini is actually the best way to find my videos. And then you can always email me at behavioreducationllc@gmail.com. And so we are going to take a break, but please make sure you join us for the second half.